So you're ready to leave California in the dust, and whatever your reasons are for that, today in this video, I'm going to share with you why people are choosing Idaho and the Boise, Idaho area particularly to move their family to when they're just done with California and they're looking for a change. What's up, guys? I'm Chase Dolan, your Boise realtor, and I help people make this exact move every single day. So if you have any questions at all about relocating from wherever you are up here to Boise, drop me an email down below. I would absolutely love to find a way to help. And if as you're watching this video, you like the content, you learn something, whatever it is, hit that subscribe button down below. That way you are the first to know everything you need to know about the Boise, Idaho area. But today, I want to break down exactly for you everything that I've learned from past clients, friends, family, doing research on forums, hearing from everybody that's made the move from California up here to Idaho, and exactly why they absolutely love it here. Little bit of a note, California is a massive state, so there are going to be very different types of town. Living in San Francisco is going to be very different than Sacramento, even though they're both in the northern region. San Diego obviously is the beach town, so there's going to be a lot of differences than something that's a little bit more inland. So before you jump into the comments and say, oh, none of this applies to my town where I'm at, everything's still super affordable. That is not the reason that we're here today. I'm going through just the general reasons that I hear from people, regardless of where they're from in California, on why they choose our area up here. And the number one reason that I hear from almost every single person is the quality of life that's offered here is just second to none, but definitely better than most parts of California. And I know this one is a little bit of a general kind of quality of life. What the heck does that mean, Chase? When we're talking about this, we're talking about the nature that's available to you. You have got so much natural land, scenery, everything that you want to do up north. You have some a little bit south. We've got sand dunes. You can basically explore all of Idaho and have a nice outdoor bucket list. And I promise you, you will never make it through the entire thing. And we also just have a much smaller city and less cities kind of moving all around to where going out into a park, even in the middle of Boise, you're still able to see the stars. If you want to get out for the eclipse, maybe you want to go see the northern lights if they actually make their way down into our part of the country, there is ample opportunity for you to go and do that. There's not as much light pollution up here, and just the nature, the trees, everything, the atmosphere just provides a much more serene environment than a big city. We also hear all the time about how people just feel so safe up here. You don't hear about as much of the big crimes. Our crime rates here are definitely lower than most parts of California. Do some of your own research on those. You can find all sorts of stats online. But overall, the general sense of safety here is very, very different than what I think people are used to where they're coming from. We also have much less traffic, so you're not going to be spending as much time in your cars. And then overall, you just have a little bit more freedom. So when I hear this, it's mostly just our government up here in Idaho. They try their best to be a little bit more hands-off. It's that red state versus blue state, which we're going to get into a little bit later in the video. But you have the freedom to kind of live life the way that you want to. Maybe this means getting a 7-acre homestead out in Middleton, and you actually can raise chickens, cattle. You can try that side of life. Or even if you're still living in Boise, it's just figuring out how do you want to live your life, and that's a little bit different here than in California. Now, the next reason that we have people flocking up here from this part of the country is purely just the cost of living difference. Now, I know that you've heard about this in all sorts of videos. There are a few on my channel that you can go to, but the cost of living here in the Boise, Idaho area is just drastically lower than most of California. This is gonna be everything from housing, rent, you're gonna find different prices on gas, groceries, everything across the board. Our utilities here are one of the cheapest in the country. Cost of living here, your money is just gonna go so much farther than it would in other parts of the country. Now, you're gonna have to sacrifice a little bit on that wage. So typically we see maybe your wage coming from San Diego will drop about 13%. Salary.com, payscale.com, take a look at all of those. But then your actual cost of living is gonna drop by about 30% moving up here. So you're still gonna see a net positive, even though you're gonna sacrifice a little bit on that wage that you're getting paid. But the biggest one of all, and something that we hear a lot when we're talking about the governmental differences and just the cost burden of living in California, is the overall tax burden up here in Idaho is drastically lower. According to WalletHub.com, they release a little list of the overall tax burden of every single state. California ranked with the 5th highest overall tax burden for their citizens, whereas Idaho was all the way down at 33. So that is a dramatic difference coming from one of the higher tax states into the bottom section of the country when we're talking about taxes. Property taxes, excise taxes, they were kind of in the same realm, The biggest difference that I saw here is in the state income tax, where California actually ranks #1 in the country with the highest state income tax. And as of right now, it's about 2.5% higher than most of Idaho. Now, when we're talking about these specific numbers, do some of your own research, but that's where we sit today. And when we're talking about 2.5% of your overall income, that is a big chunk. When we're talking about the overall tax burden, California is up towards that kind of 10 to 11%, and then Idaho's down in that 6 to 7%. That is a huge difference in what you have to fish out of your paycheck every single time. And that's before we get into the cost of living. There's a few cool things here in Boise. We have the homestead exemption, where if you're buying a primary residence, you get a little bit of a tax break, $125,000 off of your assessed value of your home. There are all sorts of tax incentive programs, so look into some of those, but of course, consult with a CPA, tax attorney, all of that. This is not accounting advice. But overall here, the cost of living, the tax burden is going to be dramatically lower. Now, a big reason for that is going into the next reason that we just have people move up here is purely just on political differences. So I'm not going to get into exactly the differences between Idaho and the government here in California, red state, blue state, progressive, conservative, whatever argument you want to have with people. All of our political beliefs are just that, they are ours. But when we're looking on the grand scheme here, California is going to be a very blue-run state, whereas Idaho is going to be more of a red-run state. This functions into all sorts of different policies, but taxes is one where we see Idaho here, they really try to lower those tax numbers. Sometimes they do it a little bit more than they should, and they give us money that they could have used for something else. But overall, when we're talking about the differences in the policies, the restrictions in California versus what you're allowed to do here in Idaho, gun laws are a very big one for people. And then as we're going through the taxes and everything, you're going to notice a pretty big political shift leaving California and coming up here to Idaho. And that is a big driving factor for people who are just fed up with what they're currently having. Now, getting into the real estate side, this is one of the reasons that people typically come up here and actually reach out to somebody like me. The chances of owning a home for themselves or for their future generations, their kids, their grandkids, are much, much higher up here in Idaho than what they currently are down in California. So we've all heard ad nauseum how the housing market has just completely exploded over the last few years. And that is 100% true. Housing up here is not as cheap as it used to be. 5, 6, 7 years ago, when the big exodus of California started to run up into Idaho, we really saw people able to get the exact same home for about 1/4 of the cost. We are nowhere near that anymore. Housing has gotten more affordable here, but it's gotten more expensive here, but it's gotten more expensive there as well. Right now, for a starter home, we're looking at just a basic 3-bed, 2-bath, about 1,200 square feet, just that first home to get your foot in the door. I can find you something here in the Treasure Valley as long as you're in the 300,000s. In California, and this is part of why I said there are a lot of different towns in California, so do not hold me to a very specific one. On the whole, what I hear from clients when they're moving up here is their kids, when they're looking at that first home, they're probably going to be in at least the 6, 7, 800s on the cheap end. But most of those bigger cities that people really do like in California, you're going to be 900,000, 1 million, all the way up to 1.4 to 1.5 million is what I've been hearing about from San Francisco. So overall, regardless of what the specific numbers are, you can see that the opportunity for home ownership is just so much easier up here, just because even in the differences in wages and everything, that is a much more affordable way of living. And if you already own a home in California, you might not be as worried about this, but when you're talking about your kids, your grandkids, you're already looking at them and saying, are they behind the 8 ball? How are they going to get ahead in life? And Idaho and Boise in particular is on the upswing. So this is a very good place to get your foot into the door. You get that more affordable home, actually start building that equity and kind of getting the roots set up. But then we know Boise is just going to continue to grow, and 10, 15, 20 years from now, it's going to look drastically different. But you got in now, whereas 10, 20 years ago in California, you might have been in a similar opportunity. And finally, the last reason that tends to come up a lot is just up here in Boise, we have got a much slower pace of life than most parts of California. This comes through kind of what I was talking about at the beginning with the overall just quality of life, but the differences in the traffic up here are pretty astronomical. It is not rare for me to hear from clients who are moving from a town in California that, hey, I drive an hour and a half each way going in and out of work. That is 2 to 3 hours a day that they're spending in their commute. Up here, you can basically get a commute even in the worst of traffic from the very tip, Middleton, Caldwell, of the Treasure Valley going all the way into Boise, and it will never take you more than an hour for the most part. Now, most people are not going to look for that big of a commute. So on average here, we see people being around that 20 to 30 minutes, 40 minutes with some bad traffic, but you're cutting off or cutting your commute into at least half and sometimes even more. Just think about all the time and all of the different things that you could do when you're not having to sit in the car. And then when we're talking about the pace of life and just the hustle and bustle, a big part of that here is just the population that we have. So Boise itself only has around 240,000 people. Compare this to some of the bigger cities in California where you're over 1 million people. Our entire Treasure Valley doesn't even reach that. We're just around, I think around 840,000 as of 2023. So you just don't have as many people that you're gonna be running into here. But even the people that you do, they are not the ones that are heading into work at 5 a.m. The expectation is that you work until 9 p.m. You're running from errand to meeting. Everything here is just a little bit slower. It's a little bit more relaxed. Now, I'm not gonna say that you're not gonna have to work 40 hours at your job. That's between you and your boss. But the expectations here, the quality of life, the work-life balance, they are much better than some of the bigger cities around our country. And this slower pace of life, in my opinion, is across the board, regardless of where you live in the entire state of Idaho, whether it's Boise or some small mountain town in the middle of the state. But overall, if you're really looking for the slowest pace of life that you can, that's where we're gonna funnel you out a little bit more to the Middletons, to Caldwell, trying to get you a little bit more space from your neighbors. You're not gonna have as much stuff going on, but that slower pace of life, if that's what you're looking for, there are some really great rural towns here that you can take advantage of. And then if you're coming from somewhere that you're a little bit separated from civilization, so you're like, hey, we don't want to go into a big city, but we'd like to be within 20 minutes of every grocery store. We're tired of driving an hour and a half twice a week to go in and get everything that we need. There are also going to be opportunities for that. So we get into that a lot in other videos talking about the proximity of everything, but just know there are things on both sides of the spectrum here, but across the board, it is a much slower and calmer pace of life than what I've heard most of California is. Now, overall, that's what I've been hearing from clients, friends, family, when I was doing some research. I'm not from California. I'm originally from Colorado, so I do know what it takes to actually relocate up here and why people would choose this over another place. But I want to hear your thoughts. So if you have any thoughts, anything that made you relocate from California to somewhere else, to Idaho, or you're just starting to think about it, drop a comment down below. I would love to hear kind of what you all think about this, and that way you can share it out to the other people who are kind of in the same journey as you. And like I said, I help people make this move all the time. So if you have any questions at all about your specific situation, drop me a call, text, email, whatever works best for you. If there's a way that I can help, I would absolutely love to. But until then, watch one of these videos that's popping up next, and I'll see you all on the next one.